to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Welcome, book lovers, readers, viewers, fairgoers. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for being here. My name is Lucy M. West. I am the author of Spirit Dancer, The Blade of Barisi, and I will be your moderator for this hour. I am here with Sam Bleicher, who is the author of Guardians of the Solar Shield, which has a much longer title. We'll get into that. Let's see if the Guardians of the Solar Shield, Earth's Climate Mirrors Under Attack 2029 and through 2037. Nice long title. We'll talk about that. Thank you, Reader's Magnet, for giving us an opportunity to bring you authors and to bring you authors and their books live at the Festival of Storytellers. I'd like to address all of you in the audience. We have a viewing audience at Reader's Magnet Facebook page, viewing audience from YouTube. Hello, welcome. Glad that you're here. Please interact with us. Put your comments on either the comments lines down below if you're in Facebook or YouTube, or in the chat box if you're here at the stage on Festival of Storytellers. Ask your questions, put your comments in. We'd love to hear from you. And now I'm with Sam Bleicher, not Bleicher, right? Bleicher. Right. With his thrilling novel, Guardians of the Solar Shield, Earth's Climate Mirrors Under Attack 2029 through 2037. Sam, before we begin and we get into the questions, you have an impressive list of credentials. Would you please tell us something about yourself?
Okay, well, I'm old. I've had a lot of life experiences. I'm a graduate of Northwestern University in economics and a graduate of Harvard Law School in international law, and I have spent my career as a lawyer, as a government official, as a professor, a law professor, and most of that time has been in the field of environmental law. And I've never written anything like a novel before I retired. I'll just say that, okay? So this is a new experience for me. I'm learning a lot about how books are published and how books get sold, but it's all new to me, and it's been an interesting adventure.
Wonderful. I was telling everybody our long title, and the long title to Guardians of the Solar Shield,
Etc.
Earth, yeah, etc.
Well,
So I'm wondering, how did you
I
choose
hope
that?
when people see the book title, they'll
Yeah,
see that the second half of what you read is a subtitle. But
yeah.
but I have a reason for it if you want to hear.
Well, yeah, certainly. Please tell us how you
Because
came to choose that.
I didn't want people to think that this was some fantasy world book, or that it was an animated cartoon or anything of this sort. When I started looking at, I spent a lot of time trying to pick a title, and I finally ended up with this one, Guardians of the Solar Shield. When I looked at what else was online, I realized that I needed to do something more to differentiate the book from other books, and the whole idea of Earth's climate mirrors is the central point of the story. It's the underlying basis for the story. So I thought a subtitle would serve that purpose.
Wonderful. Without giving us a lot of spoilers, could you sort of run through the plot a little bit for us and tell us what this book is about?
Yes, I have to do a little bit of backstory in order to get there.
Sure.
For those people who have read my other book, my earlier book, The Plot to Cool the Planet, which came out a few years earlier, you know that the books, both books, are based on the notion that we have to do something in the way of solar geoengineering to reflect some of the sunlight that's coming to Earth back into space, so that the planet doesn't heat up as quickly and doesn't do as much damage as might otherwise be result. This book picks up in 2029, where the United Nations has decided to put a series of mirrors in orbit around the Earth and accomplish that objective. It's run by a Solar Shield Project Corps, United Nations body. And the problem is that these mirrors are placed and controlled by satellites and controlled by computers. And it's possible to move them around. And the result is that some people have various reasons for moving them around, some legitimate, some not so legitimate. And the story is about two people in the Climate Corps, the Project Corps, the Solar Shield Project Corps, who want to, who see things going wrong and want to find out who's behind it and capture the villains. So it's partly an adventure, mystery adventure. And it's partly a sort of a detective story to try to figure out what is happening and why. So the plot starts out with a young woman by the name of Kelly O'Rourke, who comes from Ireland to work on this because she's not excited about what she's doing in Ireland. She's working for the Irish Air Force, and the Irish Air Force is not a big operation. But she's well educated, and she's a little smarter than most of the people who are there. And she discovers, pretty much by accident, but she discovers that one of the mirrors is being moved. And anything like that, there's a computer that is called MISTY. It's a single computer system that runs the whole satellite system and all the administrative stuff of the core. that is supposed to report any changes, and it doesn't report these changes.
Ah, I
And
see.
so
Yeah.
she's suspicious. And in the first segment, not the first page, but the first segment of the book, after she discovers this, she talks to the director's aide, his assistant, and says, I think there's something going wrong here, and I don't understand how this can happen without the commander's approval. And she wants to talk to the commander. And after a couple of tries, she gets to talk to the commander, and she says to him, I don't see how this can be happening without your approval. And he gives her a lecture about basically telling her, you're just a recruit here. In fact, you haven't even passed the induction exams yet. Go back and study and do your work.
Yeah.
In fact, he has made a change because one of the board members has asked for a change for a good reason, which I won't bother with. And that's fine. But then, second part, some other folks hack the computer and see that he has moved a mirror and realize that they could move mirrors too, and they could charge
And
people for this pleasure.
and
Right?
and so the plot thickens, huh?
Yes,
Tell me, you mentioned Kelly. Is she your favorite character? What other characters do you have in the book?
Well, there are multiple characters in the book. Yes, Kelly is the central character, and she's an ambitious and intelligent, and maybe a little too ambitious young lady who has gotten herself in trouble in the past. Um, the other characters of interest are the commander's assistant. Maybe I should start with the commander. The commander is a former, has taken this job as on leave from the Canadian Air Force, and he hopes to move into bigger and better things, like being a commander of a UN peace force at some point. And he's got a lot of problems. The Russians don't like this project at all, and other people are unhappy in other ways, and there's controversy in the scientific community. And he's trying to balance everything, and he can't afford to alienate the particular board member who asks for a favor. That's
And his name is
name is Robert Faure. Faure. Okay, he's French Canadian actually. And his assistant, who is really the second star of the show, is Jay Bhattacharya, who's Canadian, but his origin is India, is Assam, India, and he's bright and accomplished. And his only problem is that he thinks Kelly is very attractive, and I'll just leave it at that. And she thinks he's very attractive as well, which makes it even worse.
Yeah, I understand that the book. Well, I haven't read the entire book, but I've read most of that. And there's kind of another love interest with Wang Shu and Ibrahim.
Yes, and Mohammed Ibrahim. They are older people. They are in the first book. They're the lead characters in the first book, The Plot to Cool the Planet, where they are both diplomats. Wang Shu from Singapore and Mohammed Ibrahim from the Maldives, and they are part of a group of 5. Actually, I usually say 4, but Wang Shu gets brought in at the end, who think that they just need to do something, and they're never going to get international approval for a solar geoengineering project in a way that will keep the Maldives from drowning, and Trinidad and Tobago and Mauritius and the coastal areas in a dozen other countries, including parts of China, parts of Bangladesh. And so they try to put together a project to sprinkle particles into the atmosphere that will reflect some of the sunlight. And it works. But then troubles follow after that. I won't give away the whole story. It's a long story.
You were telling me a little bit earlier, but just before we came on, that you use real places and some real people even?
No, the people aren't real, but
Okay.
but I think they're plausible people. I think they could be real.
Mhm.
And the places are real, and the science is real. The whole in both books, I'm not making up the science. I'm not making up what Jakarta is like, or what Singapore is like, or what the Maldives is like. And I mean, if you want to know how real it is, the Prime Minister of the Maldives a few years ago wrote to all the nations of the world and said, "Our island is drowning." And to dramatize this, he had a desk installed underwater, and wearing full scuba gear, he went down and signed the letter, and it made news all over the world. Uh,
Wow.
and it's still there's he is one. Maldives is one country out of 39 that are members of something called the Association of Island States, who are all drowning, and uh,
Mm.
and the question is, where would all these 5% of the world's population go? There are as many people on those islands together as there are in the United States or in Europe. And nobody wants to take refugees in these days. And the idea that there are going to be more and more of them is really a serious world problem facing us. Even if we do things, but we can make it better if we make the effort.
So, who or what inspired you to write Guardians, and toward what purpose?
Yeah, I wrote these books um, mostly. Let me go back a step. Um, as I say, I'd never written a novel before. I did write a novel in 2013, a Washington political story that, in my dreams, I thought was going to be like the Bonfire of the Vanities. It has the same kind of structure, lots of characters and lots of vignettes and so on.
Mhm.
And the people who read it, my friends, told me that many of whom have worked in Washington as well as I have, who said, you really captured what goes on in the city. You captured the politics and the pressures on people at various levels in the government and Congress and so on. So that was very nice. But
Mhm.
these books are the result of the fact that I just don't think the message about climate change is getting out the way it needs to. Um, the there was a fundamental flaw in the structure of the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And you've been reading, if you read the newspapers lately, you know that they're having their 26th meeting to discuss how to deal with climate change. The flaws were, number one, they kept talking about, they based it on what will things be like in 2100. And they didn't really pay much attention to what was going to happen in the interim. And in fact, they were worried about getting 1.5 degrees centigrade warmer by 2100. But the projections they make all show that it could well be as high as 2 degrees centigrade, uh, which is 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, um, in the period between 2040 and 2060. And the other flaw was the people who were on the committee were geologists and climate experts, and they didn't have a lot of social scientists. They didn't have biologists. They didn't have people who would think about what are the governmental impacts of putting 5% of the world's population underwater. How's that going to play out in the world scene? And I think we're still just beginning to realize how bad it's going to be politically, socially, culturally, for a lot of people in the world. So that's what prompted me to write these two books, because I thought maybe it's another way to reach people, reach people who would never read a government report, would never be interested in a scientific exposition, and who probably don't read a lot of the newspaper articles about it, except to say, "Oh, this is a problem." Yes, I guess it is, but they don't understand what the problem is. And if you read the books, you get a pretty good picture, I hope.
Um, please tell us a little bit about your writing process. Is there like a time of day or a place that you prefer to write?
I wish I could say it was as rational as that. It's not. um, I'm in fact, well, when I was writing, I'm still doing a lot of I'm on boards and committees and so on. And so I couldn't have a writing schedule where I did something every day because I'm traveling to Richmond to talk about Virginia issues, and I'm in Washington talking about national issues. And of course, we have friends and meet friends, and that takes up time. So, no, my approach was to envision some of the scenes and try to write the pieces. And when I say write the pieces, I'm implying, I guess, that there was a coherent scheme. But a lot of what I wrote was sort of a bridge to nowhere. I had no idea what was going to happen later. When I put the characters together and I started putting them in place, I started thinking about, well, what would the character do in this situation? What would he say? What would she say? What is the plausible human response? And so that was one thing. I should mention that one of the other objectives was to say implicitly through both of the books, we can do better. We can do more than we are planning to do at this point. And it is not hopeless. And these disaster books really are not helping. All they're doing is making people throw up their hands and say, you want us to give up important parts of our way of living, and for what? It's all going to be a failure anyway. And I don't think that has to be the case. So I'm trying to put together a story that has happy endings. Both stories have sort of upbeat endings. When friends ask me about, so you're an optimist, my answer is, well, that's because the books end in 2025 and 2037, and that's not the worst time ahead. So
yeah, I see. So with this in mind, then, what would you most like your readers to get out of reading the books?
well, what would I like them to get out of it? I'd like them to understand that there are things that can be done, and that serious scientific effort and engineering effort needs to go into this. It's been controversial. The folks who wanted to test the solar geoengineering concept, and we're going to run a test in Sweden, not actually doing it, but just testing the machinery to see if it would work the way it was supposed to, and get some idea of, if you sprinkle some particles in the air, where do they go? How far do they go? How long do they last? When you start calibrating, it's like medicine. Well, 2 aspirin is great. A bottle of aspirin is poison. And you have to make sure you get it right. And the only way you can do that is with some experiments. And they ended up in a situation where some of the native peoples got persuaded that this was a bad idea because it was going to change things for them. And in the end, they canceled the experiment. So if you don't do the experiment, if you don't do the research, you can't possibly do this. And we need to do it. We need to do it now. Now, government agencies in the U.S. and the Congress have said, yes, we need to pursue this. But when the politics of native peoples gets entangled in things change, as often they should. So I hope people will see that we really need to know more about these things and think them through, and screaming about whether it might have bad effects on people who, if things stay the same, will certainly suffer, is the message that I want to get across.
Right. Okay. And so how would you then classify Guardians as far as the genre is concerned?
Genre. Well, that would have been a big problem, because when I entered contests, by the way, I should say, The Plot to Cool the Planet won a national NIEA award. I'll show you the cover of the book. You can see it.
Yeah, the National Indie
Excellence Award.
Excellence Award.
And I didn't win, but I was a finalist.
Good.
Okay.
Lovely.
But when I went to do these contests, which is what writers need to do in order to get some credibility, I found that that was one of the questions. What do you call this? Do you call this science fiction? Do you call this romance? Do you call this mystery? Do you, you know? And I don't have a good answer for that because there is romance in the books. There, there is fiction, but not exactly science fiction. Future fiction is not a category on any of these pages. And yes, it's a mystery and a thriller, and I don't know how they distinguish between those, and nobody can tell me. So I would call them, they're mystery books. They are future fiction. The physical realities are real, however, to the extent that I can project them. And so you could call them historical fiction. I mean, that was what you commented when we talked before, except that it's not history yet.
It isn't history, yes. So it's the opposite of history, and often our science fiction is futuristic. So if you would, I would classify what I've read as a sci-fi mystery.
Well, I've tried
So
to
it's
do
kind
that
of like,
in a couple of categories.
and that brings it together.
Some people have advised me that I really need to get the murderers and the mysteries right out in front. In which case, I should just classify them as, I should let people know they're murder mysteries and they're romances as well, which are also toward the front, because this is not supposed to read like a scientific report for the future.
Yeah, you did mention entertaining your readers, didn't you?
Yes, I did. In fact, there is a book about, it's a report of the Commission on the Nuclear War between the United States and North Korea. And it's fiction, of course. It hasn't happened. It may never happen. I hope it never happens. But you could see when you read that book the limitations of writing for a governmental commission. In fact, the author took the liberty of including in the appendix, although it was built into the story, but stated to be in the appendix, stories by individuals about what happened to them, about how they were affected by the nuclear attack. Because, I mean, how can you talk about nuclear attack without talking about thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people dying, and in very unpleasant ways? So they had to build that in very artificially, and there's not the slightest bit of romance, and there's sort of a detective work there, but it's. I could see that wasn't going to do it. I had to put the story in the future, and I had to have some cops and robbers stuff and some investigators doing mysterious, looking into mysteries, and make characters out of them too. It was fun.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Let me just say one more word about that.
Yeah, sure.
Part of the fun for me was to make up people and to make up their behavior and their in their environment and their interactions, and that was really a pleasure to do. It was so unlike anything I'd ever written before. All of my life, I've been writing documents about government documents, and writing government documents and commenting on government documents, and trial briefs and appellate briefs. And you don't put the human element in that. You don't get to talk about what's going on. How did this person feel? How did he react when somebody said such and such to them? What made them suspicious? What made them take a chance on raising issues that maybe they shouldn't be involved in? So all of that was fun to do, and it was completely different. And I think I succeeded reasonably well at it.
Wonderful. You know, it's been said that fiction is a place to reveal truths and also a place to hide them. Do you agree? And are your novels such a place?
Yes, they are. I mean, I'm trying to reveal the truth about climate change and what we're facing at this end. So that's easy to answer. Yes, it's revealing and revealing what people are doing in the context, what various interest groups are doing. There are lots of characters in The Plot to Cool the Planet. There are lots of characters in Guardians of the Solar Shield, so it's hard to talk about them. But they all are learning about what's going on and trying to cope with it. And there are lots of surprises for everybody. I have a CIA director in The Plot to Cool the Planet who is shocked to discover that some of his young staff people have already discovered what's going on because they've been keeping track of the data and trying to explain it. And their only explanation is something that is quite shocking about what another country is doing and not telling anybody. So that's the kind of thing. There are lots of secrets like that. And at the same time, I have to take on the oil and gas industry because they are still in denial. They still believe that we'll be using more oil and gas in 2050 than we are today, which is contrary to everything you're hearing from the UN and the climate conferences. And so how do you explain what they're doing? Well, they're trying to make money for their shareholders, and for the electric utilities, there are whole other calculations because money they invest returns a guaranteed income because it's a regulated utility, so they're guaranteed a rate of return. So they don't really care if they build something and then have to close it down. If they build it and have to close it down, they're going to continue to make money on that investment. And if they don't build it, they don't make money on that investment. So even though it doesn't necessarily make good sense, they're biased in the direction of building stuff.
Yeah. While we're talking about this sort of thing, I remember reading in your book some, and I guess it was the Ibrahim character was talking about what the mirror shadows were doing to tourists.
Yes. Well, that's the beginning of the problem. Ibrahim is a member of the board of the Solar Shield Project Command. So he is, along with others, the boss of Commander 4A. Right? And he discovers that the tourist sites in the Maldives, which is a major source of their income, and really the thing that has brought them out of subsistence level poverty. In some cases, the beaches are going to be shadowed. And when people try to plan vacations or conferences, you can't tell them, well, the beaches are going to be shadowed, but it'll still be bright. There won't be sunshine. There won't be the kind of bright sun and shadows on the waves and such that you might see someplace else. Well, the minute you tell them that, they go someplace else. So he is the one who goes to the commander and says, you got to move this mirror somehow so it doesn't shadow our beaches. You're going to put thousands of people out of work, maybe tens of thousands of people out of work. And you're going to lower the standard of living in the Maldives. So he, at first, Commander 4A says, well, I'll take care of it. And he does. He starts to take care of it. But he discovers that some other people have gotten access and they've seen what's been done. And they're moving other mirrors and promising people that they won't be shadowed, and promising other people, and implicitly saying, well, if you don't pay us, we'll just leave the shadow over your beach.
Oh, yeah.
So these are the villains, of course, and they come to justice at the end. I'm happy to report, as every good murder mystery should.
Okay, we have one question that's coming from our audience, but before we ask that question, I would like to encourage anyone who is viewing us today live to please join us and put your questions and your comments into the chat or comment boxes wherever you're viewing, and we'll get to them. We have a section towards in the second section that we're going to be answering all these questions. And so we will definitely get to them. And meanwhile, Sam, please tell us a little bit about where we can find your book.
Well,
or books, both of them.
As well as actually the earlier one, Appointments. There are, although that one is under an assumed name, a nom de plume, because David Carmel, Carmell, it's an old family name. And I did that because at the time I was trying to present myself to Russian and Chinese universities as a professor who was interested in climate change and was doing it. And I thought, if I'm writing a book about Washington politics and they think that's how I'm spending my time, they aren't going to be so interested. So I wrote the book with an assumed name. But these two books are in my own name, Sam Bleicher, just what you see on the screen there. And they are, of course, available on Amazon. Everything is. But they're also available through a website called bookshop.org, which is a nonprofit organization put together by the bookstores, by independent bookstores, so that they could sell books online when people ask for it, instead of just only being able to sell paperbacks. And the proceeds of the sale that bookshop.org takes, that Amazon would take otherwise, go to the bookstores. So if you're not a fan of Amazon, you can get books there. You should also be able to get both of these books in your local bookstores. They'll have to order them because they can't possibly carry the inventory for everybody whose book might show up. But if you ask, these books are listed in Ingram's directory of published books, and they should be able to order it and get it in a few days. So they're readily available if you're interested.
Okay, so available on bookshop.org through Ingram and Amazon.
Yes.
Okay, and we would like you all to know that Sam Bleicher has a website, and that website is Sam Bleicher, that's BLEICHER, author.com, sambleicherauthor.com,
Yes.
BLEICHER. Okay, wonderful.
I was just thinking that I should have been mentioning that too, for bringing it up. But yes, it's Sam Bleicher Author, no punctuation, no spaces, .com. And I have a website about me that is Sam Bleicher. Well, no, it's not Sam Bleicher. Excuse me. My email address is that way. It is strategicpathllc.com. And that is a full background of everything that I would like anybody to know about. So,
LLC.com. Would you repeat that one more time?
Sure. strategicpathllc.com. And that's my website about my government work, my private practice work, my teaching, and my novels, which are now, I've moved to the front of the website, and which has links to the places you can buy it, which you've already heard.
Wonderful. Okay, so this question that I had mentioned here collectively from the audience is, with all of your experience, wait a minute, no, the first one was from the audience. Where did you get all of your research to complete the story?
Well, research, it's interesting. I mean, the characters are made up out of whole cloth. So there's no research to be done about them, except that, I've met a lot of people in my life and spent a lot of time in meetings and working with government people and private practice lawyers and corporate representatives and studied the United Nations. That's what I've done for my life. Okay, so that's where I get that information. The places I've been to, except for the Maldives, except for some of them, I have been to mostly. I've been to Singapore. I've been to Indonesia. I've been to New York, of course, so I remember places there, and it's amazing now. I mean, the way the world is today is the way it was 40 years ago when I was younger. You can learn anything. You can find the place and the name and where the restaurant is and what floor of the building they're on with 10 minutes of effort. And that made it really easier to deal with all the things that lots of writers used to struggle with. Well, where is this place? What is it called? Does it exist? Or if it exists, I'd better get it right. Let me tell a story. I had a friend who wrote a novel.
Sure.
And in the novel, there was something about a Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup rolling in the gutter on a certain street in Bethesda, Maryland. And he got grief from a reader who said, there isn't any Dunkin' Donuts there. Couldn't have happened. Dunkin' Donuts wasn't around in Bethesda, Maryland in the time period of your novel. So that was one. And there was a fellow who wrote a novel about the Supreme Court, which my book club read. And one of the fellows, one of the men in the group, only half facetiously said, well, I almost stopped reading on page 4 when you talked about Interstate 66 running south, because it goes east-west. And it had nothing to do with the story, but he knew that fact was wrong and that it was a novel. It didn't have to all be true, but it turned him off, at least in a sense. He read it because the group was reading. So there was a question, there was a comment that came on about.
Yeah, that was going across the screen there for a moment. I was going to read that, but okay, here it is. It's Elizabeth Raby. She says, Sam, I agree that classifying it as science fiction would make climate activists see it as less important to promote. See, this is what I was talking about, that you can also hide things because of the disbelief that follows fiction. She says she hasn't read it yet, but she intends to order it from her local bookstore soon. Thank you, Elizabeth. We appreciate that. So,
and I should add, that just the other day, someone called me and left a text message saying, "Are these characters really real people, or did you just make them up?" And well, the question in particular was about a scientist in The Plot to Cool the Planet who was murdered. And this person wanted to know whether that had really happened and nobody was reporting it. Which isn't the case. It was, again, out of the characters.
Yeah.
And when I wrote it in 2018, it was in the future, but it took place in 2020, and that's not the future anymore. It's a bit of a problem with writing books in the near future.
Yeah, and with dating books, making sure that you've got dates on them. It's like, okay, it comes and goes, and it's like, was that real?
Yes.
So, but this is something that that helps to enhance a book is its realism, and the characters feel real, and they're 3-dimensional, and unlovable.
Yes.
And follow or hateable. If you've got a really good vision, you want to love to hate them.
People that you can understand, that seem real, and you can understand their motivations and get the idea of where they're going. So that's valuable. That's one of the things you have to do. That's what a writer does. Something I'd never done in my life before, and I think I'm getting there. We've got another question here.
Yeah, another one from the audience says, with all your experience, what can you say to these generations in your book?
I wish I had good news. I don't have as much good news as I would like. Governments are slow to change course, and they operate on the margin. because there's a reason why things are the way they are. It's because of political forces that make certain things happen and make other things not happen. I mean, if you think about the tax code, it's all a push and pull. Everybody, there's a line one famous legislator said, "Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the man behind the tree." And that's the kind of thing that goes on. And getting government to take such radical steps. The United States still subsidizes the oil and gas industry and the coal industry. And to say, on the one hand, we've got to get rid of these industries, and on the other hand, we're still paying them to produce more and making it easier for them to invest in such equipment is a problem. But you don't change that overnight. They're I mean, I heard just the other day somebody say that there are more lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry in Glasgow at the conference than any other group. They're there and they want to protect their interests, and that makes it very difficult to deal with. So that's one thing I would say. You need to get involved. You need to make your voice heard that you don't want the planet destroyed as a place for living for life. I mean, the planet will be here, all right? Whether there'll be any life on it of the kind we're used to is another question. And I guess I have to say, people should, what do they say? Strap in and buckle up, because the next few decades are not going to be the best. And we hope if we do a lot of things right, we can make them the worst, because we can make things get better sooner. But it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of political pressures of all kinds from the industry. We have millions of refugees now, a lot of whom are suffering in part from climate change. And we will have millions more, even if we do a lot of good things. So how are we going to deal with that as a world? Are we just going to let these people drown? Or if we bring them to some other country where they can't fish, they can't grow crops, because no one's going to give them valuable fishing rights or land to raise crops on. I mean, they let them in the country, and then what? These are all difficult, much more difficult problems than the world has had to deal with. Since we discovered nuclear weapons, I'll put it that way. So far, we've managed.
It brings to mind a couple of questions, because going back to the mirror shadows, and I was thinking, what would a system like this possibly do to what plant life there is on the earth? Because the plants definitely need the sun.
Well, we're only talking about deflecting about 2% of the sunlight, and there are a couple of things involved there. One is there's plenty of sun. Okay, the plants have. If we deflect 2%, there'll be more than enough left. In fact, it'll be better for the plants because they won't be scorched. And the other thing is, with the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that we have produced from fossil fuels, plants grow better. So in some senses, they are benefiting from the increase in carbon dioxide. It's not so good for us. And the plants don't benefit from the hurricanes, the floods, the storms, and the higher temperatures beyond a certain point. It's damaging. So I don't think we have to worry about that aspect as such. But it's just one of 100 questions that you can ask about everything. What's going to happen with fisheries? Fish depend on the ocean. The ocean is becoming more acidic. That melts the shells of crustaceans. Makes it harder for them to reproduce. And you may, if you're of a certain age, you remember that we had a problem with DDT. And the problem with DDT killing birds was that the birds were not able to make the shells of eggs strong enough to let their children, their eggs reproduce into children, into new birds. And something like that is going to be happening, is happening in the ocean. The coral dying is another
Yes.
element of that. So they're just 100 pieces, and we have to try to cope with all of them. And the first problem is to figure out which problems are more urgent and how do we deal with those.
Well, what do you think? I mean, if you do, what do you think is something that one person can do now?
It's very difficult. Well, one person can decide to buy an electric car instead of a fossil fuel car, and build and manage to live with electric appliances instead of natural gas appliances. Even though I've never met a woman who didn't prefer a gas stove to an electric stove, and I suppose the
Me
chef.
too.
Yes, everybody does. And I've done just enough cooking to know why they feel that way, and they're right, of course. But natural gas is 85% methane. So when you read about the methane problem, we're talking about natural gas and getting it out of people's homes, even over a life cycle of their products. Nobody's going to go out and buy a new stove just because their current stove uses methane and put in an electric stove. But as new houses get built, and as old equipment fails, you'd like them to put in electric. And then we have to produce the electric from windmills and solar panels and wave action. There are lots of ways to do it. But it's going to take a lot of electricity. It's going to take a lot of battery storage. It requires chemicals. So again, the world is complicated.
Okay, wonderful. Are there any other questions, people, from their live audience? Again, we want to make sure that everyone knows that you can get copies of Sam Bleicher's books from bookshop.org or Amazon or Ingram. And you can learn more about Sam Bleicher at sambleicherauthor.com or strategicpathllc.com, right?
Right.
Okay. Also, we have a few minutes here before we're going to close. Can you just give us a tiny little hint of your other book, The Plot to Cool the Planet?
Well, The Plot to Cool the Planet is Mohammed Ibrahim and Wang Shu, who are mentioned, who are old people in the Guardians of the Solar Shield, are both diplomats. They become lovers. And then they break it off because he's married and because he's Muslim and she's Buddhist. And so there are problems, and they realize that neither one of them could stay on as a government representative if they were married to somebody of a different religion and from a different part of the world. And in fact, in some countries, including the Maldives, it's illegal to marry someone who isn't a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, which is an interesting phenomenon. But even though he could have multiple wives, he can't have this one as his wife unless she's willing to convert. And then what is her government going to say? She's from Singapore. They're all Chinese. So there are lots of tidbits in these stories. They are complex, and yes, I couldn't resist putting a lot of those kinds of details in because they're all surprising to people, and they're surprising. That one was surprising to me. I knew there were some countries in the Middle East that had that approach, but I don't think that that's true in a lot of Muslim countries, and I'm sure it's not an issue in a lot of other places. Or if it's an issue, it's a religious and cultural issue, not a legal issue, which would be in this case. So these two people joined with some other diplomats, and since Singapore is practically the only rich country among the island states, Huang Shu is brought in because she can go to the prime minister and say, we ought to fund this project. It's not going to cost a lot in our terms. And of course, the question is, yeah, but what are the political ramifications? What if I support this? And the first reaction is, first of all, this is a crazy idea. And second, it's not untested. And secondly, the political impact on me as prime minister is that people will say you're wasting our money on this project that everybody knows is impractical. And then he thinks about it and comes back later and says, maybe I can make myself, well, he doesn't say it out loud to her even, maybe I can make myself a hero by supporting this project. If it doesn't work, we'll just hide it, you and me. If it does work, I'll be a champion of forward-looking environmental protection. And he decides to go for it. And the money, of course, is the important part. The other person who's important is the Prime Minister of Indonesia, who faces similar kinds of questions, discusses it all with his cabinet in the abstract, saying somebody has suggested that maybe this might be done somewhere in the world. What would you think? And what results is 2 long meetings of argument among his cabinet officers about whether they should do this or not. And he decides that's not going to give me an answer. He just decides to go ahead and do it himself. So, and when they do it, they run into the Russians. I'll give that away. They run into the Russians who are eager to have shipping through the Arctic and want to melt the Arctic ice cap so that they can ship oil 12 months out of the year through the Arctic. Much faster than any other way they can get it from the east coast of Russia, which is on the Pacific Ocean, to Europe where there is demand. So it's a complicated plot, but it reflects that is a reality. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. The Russian desire to do that, to take advantage of the Arctic, is reality. Whether they are doing or will do or might do the kind of geoengineering to hasten the melting of the Arctic ice caps is another question.
Right. Okay. Oh, we have just a few minutes left, and I am one of these who I know that this question has been asked of me and other authors, and so I want to ask of you, what is it you like to do when you're not writing?
But I'm not writing. Actually, I'm active in some environmental organizations, and I'm trying to elect members of Congress and state government officials who will be going in the right direction, not backwards. And it's a close situation in the United States right now. So, and besides that, what do? I talk to people. Like we have dinner parties, and go to their houses for dinner parties. And I have a good friend who's a sculptor, and we were just at his studio where he had an open house for his studio, and it's always fascinating to see how he makes metal sculpture. It's just interesting work. So before we run out of time, first of all I want to thank Lucy West for being.
Oh, I was going to ask, who would you like to thank?
And I appreciate your work as a moderator. It's I find it much easier to answer questions. I've done some readings, and I think I'm not theatrical enough to do readings and make them sound like anything. But answering questions is the most fun. I mean, it's much more fun than lecturing.
My pleasure.
Because I already know what I think. So thank you very much. And thank
you're welcome.
you, of course. I'm delighted that some people have tuned in and a few have even asked questions. If you want to send me questions, if you've got them in line by any chance and think I ought to be getting them, there's no way for them to be preserved if they aren't shown on the screen during this hour. What you can do is go to sambleicherauthor.com and put your questions in there. There's a box for you to write to me. and I promise you I will answer. I'm always interested in talking about this issue. It's the thing that's on my mind every day. So, thank you.
Okay, SamBleicherBooks.com. Oh, one more thing.
No, not
What is your
SamBleicherBooks.com. Wait a second. SamBleicherAuthor.com.
SamBleicherAuthor.com, not Sam Bleacher Books. Sam Bleacher Author, excuse me. Let's get that correct. And it's Bleacher, Bleicher, Sam Bleacher Author.com.
And no punctuation in Sam Bleicher Author.
Right.
No.
All one word.
No space, no
Yeah,
dot.
no extra dots or underscores or anything. Just
Yes.
SamBleicherAuthor.com.
Thank
Okay. And you are in your booth and here at the Festival of Storytellers. When are you going to be in your booth this next week?
I will be there Monday at 4:00, and I will be talking about the primary plot of the Plot to Cool the Planet. On Wednesday of last week, I talked about the murder mystery element of that book, but save the diplomatic and.
So any other times next week?
Then
Monday?
I will be on Wednesday at 4:00 and on Thursday at 6:00 talking about Guardians of the Solar Shield.
Okay.
It's only a half an hour, and I'll be happy to answer questions there too. It's my preferred genre. How shall I say that?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And we want to thank Readers Magnet, their management and their staff, the Festival of Storytellers for giving us this opportunity to meet authors and talk about their books in this process of writing.
Yes.
We want to thank our readers, our viewers, those people that we write for, you who have come to see us live. Thank you very much for being here, for supporting us. This is Luthia M. West and Sam Bleicher. We would like to thank you.
Thank you. And I will just say, yes, the whole point of writing books is to get to people that you can't talk to during the day.
And this is from Readers Magnet. We share your stories with the world.